Welcome to our presentation about Romeo and Juliet. We juniors went through our first time reading Shakespeare some time ago. So in this presentation, we are going to share some tips we think are going to help make your experience with Shakespeare not only easier, but much more meaningful. The first thing to know about Shakespeare, or rather understand, is his language. Some of the words he uses are tricky, so study your Shakespearean language so you can understand every word. It is very important to reread until you make sure you fully know what the passage is saying. Even a tiny line can contain meaningful details about the play. Shakespeare also uses a lot of symbolism in his plays, so watch out for words that are repeated a lot. But don't worry, we will elaborate a little more on that later on. And this may come as a shock, but Romeo and Juliet is not exactly a love story. It is about a lot of stuff. Love just is not really the focus, so do not dwell too much on the romance and focus on the other themes the play presents.
Both prose and verse are devices that are used to differentiate between the different social classes. Verse is typically used by the high class or nobles, and prose is used by the lower class as a way to show the lack of sophistication in their language. Exceptions are made for the purpose of giving the play a comedic twist, something that we will be discussing later on in the presentation. In Romeo and Juliet, Romeo and Mercutio mostly use verse as they are part of the higher class, but they often use prose when exchanging jokes. This is a way of incorporating some comedy in such a tragic play. You should also take into consideration that the use of prose and verse relates to the humor of the play as well as the development of the characters' traits.
Characterization. One of Shakespeare's most powerful attributes is the difference in how his characters can be perceived. Some characters would have a different role in the story, depending on the tone of voice or the actor. Some characters themselves become ways to interpret different themes of the story. For example, some actors represent Lord Capulet as a confident and lax character who finds his way through manipulating others, while others represent him as a turbulent father, desperate to find a worthy heir. Both of these change the meaning of a certain scene. While the first example explains a theme of the difficulties of the weak on society, the second example describes a setting where society becomes a difficult competition to stay wealthy.
Next up, we have dramatic irony. Dramatic irony is simply when the audience has more information than the characters. Whenever a character makes a false conclusion, we have dramatic irony. Dramatic irony creates tension through the audience's desperation. It creates suspense, and it creates a powerful sense of progression throughout the story and develops conflict between characters that would normally not be conflicted. It also calls for strong development on behalf of the characters. An example is when Lord Capulet saw Juliet dead. He instantly became terrified by the fact that his daughter preferred death rather than getting married with someone she didn't like. This situation shows the desperation of Lord Capulet and shows a conflicted personality, which he wouldn't have shown before.
Comic relief is a common tool in Shakespeare's kit. He usually uses comic relief to release tension from a scene. While the main purpose of comic relief is to remove tension, there are some times where it jokes about similar situations or to foreshadow situations. The most classic example from the play would be after Juliet's fake death, where the musicians are told to play at a funeral instead of a wedding. This, while relieving the tension and darkness from the scene, foreshadows that these musicians will play at an actual funeral, not a fake one.
The themes of Romeo and Juliet are opposite of what one would expect. This is all due to the tragic turn of events halfway through the story. The most obvious one is about ignorance and hopeless passion. Throughout the play, Romeo and Juliet represent hopeless romantics, people looking for love, yet they are represented as uneducated teenagers who do not understand their role in society. They seek a fairy tale, but eventually the hopeless lovers witness tragic downfall in their quest. The second theme is about hastiness and jumping into conclusions. The entire reason for Romeo's death is because of his ignorance and hastiness. He immediately kills himself after seeing Juliet laying on the ground, even though Juliet was alive at the time.